Now, what I'd like to do is return to a couple of ideas that I promised I'd talk about before the end of our day. And the first is a kind of structure or pattern to follow when trying to think about people who have difficult behavior. Several of you have asked, how can we teach other people this? How do we get this built into our habit to think of behavior as having meaning, as Trish said this afternoon, unmet needs? I start with the premise that difficult behaviors result from unmet needs. The very presence of a difficult behavior tells me that something important that a person needs is missing. The question is, what is it? It's not always easy to answer that question, but that's the starting point. Another way to ask the same thing or get at the same thing is to insert the word need into all questions of why. So not why does a person run away, but why do they need to run away? Not why does a person hit, but why do they need to hit? Not why does a person say hateful things, but why do they need to? Not why does a person withdraw from social relationships, why do they need to? Inserting the word need into the question of why fundamentally changes the question. It's not necessarily easy to answer it, but it changes the question dramatically from not why does a person do this, but why do they need to do this. It starts with an assumption that's an unmet need. Now, a strategy for helping people think about this and getting to some of those answers about what people might need is to create a timeline of the problem behavior. Here, you can see today's date on the right-hand side. But you ask people this question: when was the last time things were good for this person, or at least better than they are now? And usually people can remember a time. Imagine that you ask that question about someone, they said, well, a year ago in April, he was okay. So you put April 2013 over there, and you put April 2014 over there. And then you ask people, what happened next? That's all I do, is I sit with a group of people, I say, what happened next? I don't give it any more structure than that. It's that open-ended. And I'll tell you, I don't take data on this, but I'll bet 80 to 90% of the things that people say is they talk about a change in relationships. Like this one man I met who experienced Down syndrome. He's having a really hard time. He had started hitting staff and being aggressive in the car. When everybody answered that question, they say, isn't that when his grandfather died? And it turns out this guy's really close to his grandfather. And as we talked about earlier, aggression's a normal response to grief. But it turns out this guy had a really great relationship with his grandfather, and when his grandfather passed, his behavior just kind of went to hell. And nobody was associating that loss with any of his behavior. What they were doing is messing with his medications and, trying to change this and that and coming up with consequence-based strategies. Nobody was looking at grief. As we know, aggression's a normal response to grief. Another question you might ask, in addition, was there a change in important relationships? And by the way, sometimes it's not sometimes about people leaving. It's that new people are showing up, especially people living in congregate environments. A person can leave and then a new person comes and the whole dynamic of the social system changes. It's not always about someone leaving. Sometimes it's about someone new coming. But another question you ask is, has there been a change in the person's physical health or sense of safety? Now, as I mentioned before, losing people who are close to you is the #1 cause of problem behaviors, but it ain't the only reason why you might have problems with your behavior. If you got an abscessed tooth, for example, it doesn't matter if you're surrounded by people who love you and you love, your tooth is going to hurt. You're going to need some help from a dentist. And actually, the kind of amazing thing about all of this is that being surrounded by people you love actually does help with the abscessed tooth, but it's not going to get better on its own with all of that present. But sometimes it's hard to distinguish, is this an underlying physiological issue or is this an issue about things that are going on in the environment? Trish told the story this morning about the guy who kept going in the shower and it took years before people figured out it was associated with pain. Giving him a mild painkiller dramatically changed things. But sometimes it's really hard, especially with people who don't have language, to know what's going on. And doctors, most doctors who are trained in our world are trained to respond to verbal reports of symptoms. Lots of people I work with, they don't use words or have a formal means of communication. And lots of you work with people who, even if they had that language system before, they can't manipulate it anymore. It's hard for them to get organized to speak in ways they used to be able to speak for any number of reasons, right? So it's not surprising that sometimes doctors, they meet people who might experience a disability and they engage in diagnostic overshadowing. They don't know quite how to do the work of their trade in the absence of verbal reports of symptoms. But there's some ways to tell. This is called a scatter plot diagram. It's a way of taking data. I'm not a big fan of taking data, and not because data can't be helpful, but because usually we take it and we don't pay any attention to it. Often we take it and it tells us things we don't want to hear, so we don't pay attention to it. Like it tells us our programs aren't working, the person's still having a hard time after years of doing what we've been doing, but we don't pay any attention to our data, we just keep doing what we've been doing. But, data can be helpful. But I like data that it doesn't tell us just that it's happening, but tells us maybe why. And that's what this kind of data is designed to help us take a look at. This is data taken for a person who engages in hitting her cheek very hard with the palm of her hand, the balls of her hand. And we didn't know, was it a physiological issue like a sinus problem or headaches or something wrong? She was always hitting one side of her face in particular, making us think it was maybe some physically felt uncomfortable for her. What we did here is, you can see, you start the day at 7 o'clock in the morning, go to 6:30 at night, and there's another sheet that goes for the rest of the hours of the day. You can see it starts at Monday and goes to Sunday. Every time she would hit her cheek, we'd make a triangle in the time period corresponding day that she hit her cheek. If she hit herself twice, we would color half that triangle in. You can see an example of that at 10:30 on Monday. If she hit herself 3 times or more, we color the entire triangle in. And you can see evidence of that at 11:30 on Monday morning. Now, looking at this pattern, answer this question for me. Is this a physiological problem? No, you're right, it's not. And why are you saying that? Well, you're saying that because it looks like it happens during certain times of the day and doesn't happen at other times of the day. And you're absolutely right. I don't remember what the problem was, like shift or whatever it is, but the bottom line is, when it's physiological, it doesn't show up like this. For example, you notice it doesn't happen on Saturday and Sunday too much at all. Well, if it's a physiological issue, it's not taking the weekend off, right? Well, I was going to bother you with the sinus infection, but thank God it's Friday, It don't happen. But I can't tell you the number of people that are on antidepressants for things like their behavior or whatever it might be, and you look at their behavior and it looks just like this pattern. It ain't depression when it looks like this pattern. Now, sometimes people have mood swings that happen with some kind of routine, but it doesn't follow the days of the work week. You know what I mean? And one way to know this is, or one way to proceed once you know this is environmental, is to say, what's happening during the time of the day where this shows up the most? And then a much more fruitful question sometimes is to say, what's going on during those times when it never shows up? And can we recreate circumstances and times of the day when it's not showing up more often during the day, and try to figure out what's bothering the person during the times of the day and do something about it? So imagine it was a shift change issue going on. There might be things we can help people to do during times of transition. Imagine it's something we're asking her to do during this time of the day that she hates doing. Let's try doing something she loves doing and seeing if there's any change. Any number of ways to proceed. But you can also look at those times when it isn't happening and say, who's around, what's she doing? If it were a physiological issue, it might look like this. Right? You look at this and you can't really figure out when's it going to happen next. A way of thinking about this is, if I was to give you $500 to predict the next time it wouldn't happen, there'd be some chance you'd get lucky and be right, but it's pretty random. Now, the good thing about scatterplot diagrams, you can put them on a wall and stand back a distance from them and look at them, and sometimes you can see patterns you can't see up close. I like that about these. In this case, it turned out to be physiological. You see, it really hasn't got anything to do with who I'm with and what I'm doing. I forgot what the problem was, but imagine it was a sinus infection. I got a sinus infection. And it just feels crummy on me. This is what it looks like when it's physiological. It's kind of a random presentation. Doesn't matter who I'm with, what I'm doing, random presentation. And with people who have physiological issues, another clue about it is that often it comes on fairly quickly. The person's doing fine for a while, and then over a matter of hours, sometimes it's a matter of a few days, the person just is having a hard time just like this all the time today. That's usually a physiological or potentially a psychiatric issue. The problem, remember, for people who experience disabilities is often even when we see patterns like this, like we did with Patty, just assume it must be environmental. The diagnosis overshadows consideration of much more likely explanations. So in my practice, I meet people who are hitting their ears a lot, and doctors will say it's autism. You don't hit your ear because you have autism. You might hit your ear because you got an ear infection or you have a tooth that's erupting. You know, it might be a person that you're supporting who has Alzheimer's, who's becoming really uncomfortable in their posture and falling down, or has weird kind of formation in their posture, who's experiencing something like sorry? No, it could be vertigo. It could be, I want to say, what is it when you pull a muscle and the muscle, sorry? Well, it could be sciatica, but never mind. It's, you know, it could be lots of reasons why you'd be kind of bent over in your posture and having a hard time. Sorry? Scoliosis. Well, those things tend to show up across time, right? I mean, they can get worse by certain things happening to you, but they tend to be fairly, you know, people have the problem. They could be having the time of their life and have scoliosis. It's often a lifelong pattern. But things that come on, I was thinking of a hernia, right? Sometimes people have blockages in their gastrointestinal system that'll cause odd postures, things like that. On my website, if you're interested, and in a couple of the papers, one called Upside Down and Inside Out, I've got a table that was prepared by a group of doctors and psychiatrists in Colorado who over and over again in their practice and meeting people found these physiological issues going on with people that were the root of their problem behavior. This chart is 2 pages long, but you can see hip pain can be, an uneven seat can be hip pain, genital discomfort, rectal discomfort. People biting with the back of their teeth can be a dental issue or an ear issue. All these doctors did is they said, look, over and over again, we're meeting people who may not use speech, who have these problem behaviors, and we found out there's these underlying physiological or psychiatric issues. This isn't meant to be a diagnostic tool, but rather just something to help you to think outside the box a little bit. I mean, I meet people who engage in rectal digging. That was one question from this morning, who have enlarged prostate glands. More often than not, it's men who are engaging in rectal digging, and a significant number of them have enlarged prostate glands. Women who engage in vaginal digging who have yeast infections. So I know in medicine, I want to say geriatric medicine, is that the right term? There's another term for it that's better. But what they're learning is our body changes really dramatically during our lives, and increasingly, since there are people that are sensitive about any number of issues that show up for people that are quite treatable, and when treated, people feel dramatic relief about things that we used to just assume were happening because of old age, right? It became like the explanation, the generalization about everything, and we know these things, many of these things are way more treatable than we ever dreamed. So when we look at this and we say, when were the last time that things were good, one possibility when we ask the question, what happened next, is was there been a change in important relationships? Has there been a change in the person's physical health or sense of safety? Another question we might ask is, did joy leave the person's life? That gentleman I told you about who lost his grandfather, he and his grandfather were avid fishermen. And so when he lost his grandfather, he not only lost his grandfather, but he lost his fishing partner and the amount of time he went fishing. Often, people live lives that are really joyless, in my experience, and a lot of the time, we've got them on these nonsensical behavior modification programs where we're rewarding behavior for some things and withholding reward for others. I think that's nonsense. Just nonsense. What you want to do, it all boils down to what Leo Vecchione said, be nice to people. And when they're having a really hard time, be nicer. Yeah, people don't get worse when you're nice to them. Like, think of this. We really believe that if we're nice to someone when they're having a hard time, they're going to have a hard time more often. You know, they're going to get used to it. Think of it. Is that really true? We're afraid that if we're nice to someone or we do something, give them something nice, they have a cup of coffee when they're really mad, they're going to be mad over and over again. Is that really true? Like, think about yourself. When you're having a hard time, do you need more support or less? And my bet is most people in this room say more. Now, what each of us wants for support, what Rachel wants, what I want, what Rebecca wants, may be very different things based on our learning history, but we want more of it, not less. Am I right? I mean, think about this idea that we're going to reward the wrong behavior. Think about that just for a second. Can you imagine me getting in a fight with my wife, Cindy? Can you imagine me going out to a bar later and saying, "No, bartender, no beer for me"? I was ugly to my wife, Cindy, earlier in the day, and I don't want to reinforce that behavior. I'd say, "Bring me 2 beers. You can't get them to me fast enough. Who the hell does she think she is?" And the smokers in the room, your boss fusses at you about not getting paperwork done. You go out during your break and go, "You know, I don't believe I'll smoke that cigarette. I was non-compliant earlier in the day, and I don't want to reinforce that behavior." You light out 5 cigarettes at one time. Who the hell do they think they are? And the interesting thing about this, isn't it interesting, your behavior doesn't get worse. And it's exactly what your reward schedule looks like. You tend to access these things more, not less, when you have a hard day. But what these things are for you, and what's missing in the lives of many people I meet in my practice, are coping skills. They help you get through a tough time. You know, a guy who was banging his head against the wall one time, I said, "You look thirsty, can I get you a Coke?" People were freaking out about this. "You can't give him a Coke." "Well, if you give him a Coke now, every time he wants a Coke, he's going to bang his head against the wall." Well, yeah, if the only way the guy can get a Coke is to bang his head against the wall, you can be pretty sure that's true. The question is, why does he have to go to so much trouble to get a Coke? You know what I'm saying? I just don't buy it anymore. I was trained to think that way. I don't buy it anymore. What gets us to behave the way we behave is not the presence of these rewards or punishers. It's that we want membership in the pack. If we have membership in the pack, we're more than happy to do things that the pack does. Kids aren't going to school because they want to learn things or they want to get stars on their papers or get, you know, good grades. They're going to school because that's where the pack is. And teachers, they're all for these star and reinforcement systems, but talk to teachers about being on merit pay, and they go crazy. "You can't do that, that's ridiculous," right? Hey, you got kids on this schedule all day, but you couldn't tolerate it for a minute. You want to learn more about that, there's a book called Punished by Rewards by Alfie Kohn. I highly recommend it. A follow-up book called Beyond Discipline, which looks at, well, what do you do to help motivate kids? Well, you got to build community for kids, and it works more powerfully than we ever dreamed for reasons we never dreamed of before. Make joy a goal is my encouragement. I wish our whole system said, instead of people filling out these reports and writing all these behavior plans and stuff, I wish we just said, all right, the goal now is to help people have a good time this next year. Just make photo albums of them having a good time. And you know what? I believe a significantly larger number of people would be happy at the end of next year than are happy now, and it would cost us less and be a lot less trouble. I'm not going to suggest to you it's the only thing people need. I'm just going to suggest to you that you get that for people. You make joy a goal, and people are going to get better. Make joy a goal. Don't make people earn it. Make it be a part of every day. You might ask the question, has there been a fundamental change in the person's power and control? When this gentleman lost his grandfather, he also lost a major communication ally. His grandfather could understand him like nobody else in the world and would always come to his meetings. And when people couldn't understand him, his grandfather would always defer to the grandson and say, "Do you mind if I help people understand?" And only with his grandson's permission would he then say, "This is what my grandson's trying to say." But we are individuals who need to have a sense of influence over the environment, over others. And if you take that away from us, we'll begin to act out. An example I always use is, imagine I came and I had brought big people with me who stood at these doors and said, for the rest of the day, you're going to listen to whatever I tell you. After talking to you and hearing your questions, it's clear to me you don't know what you're talking about. I'm an expert from the East Coast of the United States, and you will do as I tell you. My bet is it wouldn't be long before someone in the room swore at me. You know, they're like, or at least wrote a nasty thing on a piece of paper and passed to the neighborhood. If you think he is. You might think he's gone to a lot of trouble getting these big people to stand at the doors. But what if I was serious about it? A lot of you there. That sounds hostile. Any of you parents? Imagine you got to go pick up your kid for a doctor's appointment or pick them up from the recreation program or after school or something, and you had to leave early, but I told you sit in your seat, you're not going anywhere. How long do you think it'd be before one of the moms or dads in the room pushed by the guy at the door and said, "Get out of my way"? Half a second. So what you're telling me is somewhere between not long and a half a second, this very responsible group of people would become verbally assaultive and aggressive. Ain't that what you're saying? What's your name? Aaron? Erica. Did anybody notice that just before Erica got aggressive with the guard at the door, her eyes started to flicker? I think she might have been experiencing a frontal lobe seizure. I think we should schedule her for a neurological evaluation. It'll be written in a language most of us can't understand. And if we're lucky enough to get the neurologist on the phone later, she'll say something like, "Well, I don't know if Erica's having a seizure, but keep your eyes open for that eye-flickering behavior." Have you heard this before? Yeah, how about that one? You've heard this before. Erica, she doesn't make Zyprexa in her body naturally like the rest of us, so we got to give her Zyprexa supplements every day. You've heard that before, haven't you? Or how about this one? We don't know what Erica's reinforcers are. If we knew what her reinforcers were, we could teach her new and appropriate behavior. Why, she wouldn't have time to be bad anymore because she'd be good more often. And if we could get back to the good old days, you know, before the human rights committees came along, we could punish her behavior, stop it dead in its tracks, create a window of opportunity to teach her new and appropriate behavior. Why, she wouldn't have time to be bad anymore, and if she was bad, she'd think twice about it now, wouldn't she? You've heard that too, haven't you? Or how about this one? There's a full moon. And every time there's a full moon, Erica gets really wild. No offense, Erica, but a lot of people around here are going, "You got that right." Folks, do you know that the full moon theory is just full of nothing? Do you realize that the doctor who delivered you in the delivery room had more gravitational force over you than the moon does? It's about mass. The reason it pulls oceans is because oceans are big. It doesn't pull you. It's about mass. But what's wrong with all these explanations? What's the problem with them? Nobody asked Erica. Oh man, what a great starting point. It's so common in our field, we don't even ask people who are the subject of all our behavior plans what they think. Anybody in here ever tried to change a behavior? You know how hard it is to change behavior. Some behavior is harder than others. It's really hard to change a behavior that other people want you to change. They haven't even asked you what you think. Often it's the behavior specialist who comes in and does hours of observations with Erica and comes up with a behavior plan that they almost always have to type because they've got OCD. And trains the staff to do it, and if it works, goes, "I knew it would work," and if it doesn't work, goes, "You know, you can't find good care staff anymore." You've heard that before, haven't you? Yeah. And the other thing that's noticeable about this is we don't understand the context surrounding it. You see, the reason Erica is lashing out the guard at the door, she's got to go pick up her kid. There's not a person in this room, when they understand what she needs, thinks this is a problem behavior. Our definition of this as a problem behavior changes dramatically when we know why. I got to ask you a question. Does anybody in this room think I can get Erica to forget about her kids if I reinforce her with regular intervals of Coca-Cola? One parent who I tried this story with, one parent said, "I'd forget about my kids for a glass of water." But I mean, I could put Erica on medication that'll make her forget about her kids. I can. I can put her on medications, classes of medication that'll make her be so stoned she can't tell her left foot from her right foot. But you take her off those medications, she's going to be back to thinking about her kids. The problem for many people who experience disabilities, they live lives of complete powerlessness. They can't make decisions about little things, let alone big things. And then when they're having a hard time with that, we treat them like they're the problem. We act like we wouldn't have problems if we lived such a life. Yeah, we would. Somewhere between not long and just a half a second, we become verbally assaultive and aggressive. You take away your ability to influence the environment. The shorthand way of saying this is people who are out of control need more control, not less. And the problem with our interventions historically is if people start acting out, we start taking even more control. Well, if the problem is happening in the first place for the absence of control, we only make the problem worse. But then guess what just steps in to do its dance? Diagnostic overshadowing. Oh, he must be doing it because he experiences this disability or that disability, and we ain't looking at the context and wondering, geez, maybe it's right under our nose. We might ask the question, has there been a change in the person's capacity to contribute to others? It turns out that making a contribution to others is critical to our well-being. The neuroscientists are now telling us that when we make a contribution to others, our pituitary gland is rewarding us with things like oxytocin. It's building our immunity. It's repairing cells on the cellular level. It's making us feel good from head to toe. Being needed, it turns out, is way more biochemical than we ever dreamed. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? That if I'm needed by the pack, my membership in the pack is more assured. And also the survival of the pack is more assured when I'm doing things that support the pack. The problem for a lot of people who experience the world, they're vulnerable in the world, is that they've lost this place where they're needed by others. I think it's a major part of the struggle for people who are elderly, who have lost touch with their families. As much as anything, they've lost their contribution to the larger world. The moms and dads who raised families, and the bankers and the lawyers and the nurses and the teachers and the people that worked at the grocery store and the people that watched after other kids and the musicians and the people that made a contribution, they've lost that now in a medicalized, centralized place. They've lost this place where they're needed by others. I think the world is suffering from this. Part of helping this man who lost his grandfather was helping him to develop an identity of who he would be now in the world without his grandfather. And a big thing that helped him was we created a ceremony where he made photo albums for all the members of the family. His support person helped them go through old boxes of photos. And he made these wonderful books that were scanned on the computer. I don't even know how it all worked. But he gave one to his mom and dad who lost their dad and father-in-law. He gave one to his brothers and sisters who lost their grandfather and other people throughout the family. A stand-up grandson was he. Prior to that, a big part of his contribution to the world was helping his granddad. His granddad's arthritis had gotten terrible in his later years, and now his grandson would help him load the boat up and get the boat off the loading thing into the water, you know. And his grandfather used to go on and on about it. Oh, my grandson, he's a stand-up grandson, he'd say. He, unlike his father, my son, he's there to help me with things. And, oh, he took a great deal of pride loading stuff up and loading it back to the truck at the end of the day. Now he not only lost his granddad and the joy of fishing, but he also lost that way he was a stand-up grandson until he found ways that I could be the grandson who keeps my grandfather's memory alive. So a question you can ask when you're asking, when was the last time things were good? What happened next? Is how there's been a change in the way the person's made a contribution to others. Another question might be about the person's skills. Sometimes people come to new environments and new places which require new skills. One of the things we do whenever we come to a new place is we first check it out socially. Some of you applied for jobs recently. You get a new job. You know that feeling where you're walking around for a couple of weeks and you're kind of in a daze? People tell you things, but you can't remember what they told you. They tell you things one day, and the next day you have to go and say, I know you talked to me about this yesterday, and I'm so sorry, but I forgot where we're supposed to get the forms that we do this for. And we feel kind of silly, but we can't remember anything. You know why? Because our social brains, the first thing our social brains want to do and are preoccupied with, and now have fully engaged the prefrontal cortex about, is, am I going to fit in here? We're looking for that. We're nervous about that. We can't think clearly about anything because we're so anxious about that. And then we'll meet somebody at the workplace who will, you know, connect with us. Oh, you used to live in Vermont, huh? Yeah, oh, I used to live over in Waitsfield. You're kidding. No, oh my gosh, we have friends in common. Meet one person, you start to feel like maybe I'll have one connection to this pack, and the whole central nervous system settles down, and the next thing I know, I can remember what they told me about where the forms are. Remember, the Goldilocks brain on a good day is overwhelmed, but when the Goldilocks brain first comes to an environment, is wondering, am I going to fit in? It's really overwhelmed. I think that's a struggle for lots of people who experience disabilities when they get jobs by their job coaches. If they come, the first thing they want to know is, am I going to fit in? When they do, then they can figure out the rest of the job. But I think it's probably true, too, when people move from someplace they've been living their whole lives and come and spend some time with you and living with you now. It's like everything is new, and all of this requires new skills. Even finding out where things are and where's the hallway that goes down to the dining hall, and all of those things are brand new things that are really tough to deal with, especially if you're stressed about, am I going to fit in here? And finally, a question I wanted to get to before too much time passes: has there been a change in the support needs of the person's supporters? As Gene Clark said, a person's needs are best met by people whose needs are met. You want to help anybody in the world, you got to be okay. You know, that guy who fell overboard, the ship, the luxury liner, imagine somebody threw him a life preserver. Before he got too far from the ship, imagine he was able to put it on. On that life preserver is a beacon that's designed to activate as soon as it gets wet. And it's sending out a signal that tells whoever's got something to read that signal with where I am. But those big ships, they're moving. And that storm is pushing. And the next thing you know, he can't see the ship anymore. He's in the midst of a terrifying storm. You might say he's in a blind panic. What happens when the central nervous system, the limbic system, is activated? It shuts down our ability to register much memory of anything. His life flashing before his eyes. But imagine the Coast Guard are on their way. They've heard someone fell off the ship, and they pick up his beacon. He's a lucky, lucky man. On board that helicopter are men and women who don't know this guy personally, but they are putting themselves in harm's way to come rescue him. It's amazing. These people are getting in these metal contraptions that to me look like they shouldn't fly, going up in the sky and then deliberately, on purpose, heading into a storm. I get on a plane, there's some turbulence, and I start freaking out, you know, it's like, oh. But these people, they're like doing it on purpose. And it's interesting, isn't it, that those people, they don't freak out and their limbic system doesn't get fully activated. They actually think pretty clearly, don't they? And you might be wondering, how can they override this brain that would make most of us go into the fetal position? Well, that's because they've gone through a training that's designed to do two things: normalize threat and build up self-confidence. You see, being in the Coast Guard, becoming a rescue swimmer, go through rigorous training. They put you through one test after another. On opening day, there might be 70 recruits in the new class. They'll throw 69 rubber rings into a pool. You got to jump in to get one. If you don't get one, you're out of the program. They start weeding you out on day one. They do things like weigh your feet down, cinder blocks or something, and tie your legs, throw you in the pool. And you're supposed to calmly untie yourself and swim to the surface. There'll be people in scuba gear swimming all around you. If you panic and you can't get out untied, they'll rescue your butt. But if they have to rescue your butt, you're out of the program. Good at that. They tie your legs together, weigh you down, tie your hands behind your back. You got to do everything calmly. You know, you might say, oh, that's not so hard. Yeah, try doing it underwater. It's really hard not to panic. And when you get good at that, you swim to the surface. Then they put you into another challenge. Like they put you into a mock-up of a helicopter, thrust you into the pool, and you're supposed to calmly decompress the cabin, which means let the water flow in before you try to swim out. You get good at that, they'd make you do it upside down. You get good at that, they make you do it upside down in the pitch black. In other words, you go through a rigorous training that is designed to increase the stressors in your life. But the goal is build up your self-confidence every step along the way. Why? Because what we know about self-confidence is that it helps to keep the limbic system from kicking into gear. If they were to take those recruits and put them to the most severe challenge on day one, they'd lose them all. The whole design of it is we're going to gradually increase your threat, and then we're going to build up your self-confidence. In that helicopter that's come out to rescue that guy at sea, there are men and women who have been training for this day for a long time. And the new recruits, they're with the older recruits, the elders, the ones who have a lot of experience in these situations. In that helicopter, everything has a place and everything is in its place. For example, there's a way in which that flashlight has to be in that harness on the helicopter wall facing a particular direction, and if it is an inch too far to one side or an inch too far to the other, if it's facing the wrong direction, your commanding officer will go up one side of you and down the other. And why? Why do you hear about this in military training and you hear about these Coast Guard training? Why would that be? Well, what they know is that when you go out in a storm to rescue people, your limbic system is going to get engaged no matter who you are. It's supposed to. You need it to engage. But you are not going to have a lot of time to problem solve up there, and anything we can do to make everything as certain as possible is a good idea. You ought to be able to reach for that flashlight and find exactly where it is in the pitch black, because it's always in this place, and you've reached for it so many times you don't need your eyes anymore. Your muscles know just where it is. The last thing you need to be doing is walking around going, oh God, what'd I do with that flashlight? I think I left it over here. Well, that flashlight, if it ain't in its harness, can be like a missile floating through the air that can decapitate you. And the last thing you need when you're really stressed out is to be having to try to use your prefrontal cortex to find something that ought to be in the place it ought to be in. When we're doing support of people, often we act every time they're in crisis like we never saw them in crisis before. That's what's astonishing to me. People have a hard time like once a week. And every time it happens, we act like we don't understand why. Oh, everything was going fine. Why did this happen? We don't know what to do. It's happening so regularly, we ought to be pretty clear about what to do. I think you've got to build support plans for people that are in crisis, tell you exactly what to do every step along the way. And they see that person in the water. And, you know, one of those rescue swimmers is going to jump out of that helicopter, and all the other Coast Guard people, they say through their headsets, be careful of yourself on the way down. You know, you wouldn't think you'd have to say that. You know, me, I jump out of a helicopter with my fins and stuff on. I'd be pretty careful, I think. But when your limbic system's engaged, there's a lot of things you forget. Do you know that water is the only element that gets harder the faster you hit it? And you jump out of that helicopter, it might be just 20 feet beneath you in the surface of that water, but a big trowel will come through, and now it's like 80 feet, and you're flying through the air like a missile. If you don't hit that water right, that water can be as hard as concrete. And it's not uncommon for rescue swimmers to jump out of those helicopters and break a leg or break a rib, knock themselves unconscious. When you've done that, you're no good to the person who's in the water. Now there are two people that need to be rescued. So they actually say through the headsets, be careful on the way down, right? And you have to repeat it back so everybody's sure you heard it. And even when they do that with some regularity, people still get hurt. But they do it because they know you got a lot on your mind right now, and chances are you're not going to pay attention to what's right in front of you and what's really immediate. The shorthand way of saying this is a person's needs are best met by people whose needs are met. A drowning person's needs are best met by a rescue swimmer whose needs are met. The reason I tell you this is because I think a lot of people who are in caregiving roles are not taking care of themselves. We're burning the candle at both ends of the day. We're often not getting to some things that are really basic that we need in our lives, and we're good people, and it's incredible that we do this, but most people who need us for long periods of time. They need us to be in there. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you've got to be okay to help people be okay over time. A person's needs are best met by people whose needs are met. A simple question I'd ask you is, are you taking care of yourself? Or does it feel like some selfish act? I know people who do this work, they feel guilty if they take a little time to have a bottle of wine. You know, oh, I should be calling the office or calling where I've come from. Just relax, have some wine. Sometimes, a shorthand way of saying it is sometimes in our work, we really take so much responsibility for everybody's feelings. It's really unnecessary and disrespectful. And part of what we got to do is we got to be models for people of what it looks like when you take care of yourself. Not people who give it away all the time in every circumstance. And it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Those rescue swimmers know I ain't no good to you if I don't take care of the things I need. Then the rescue swimmer will swim over to the person, but they won't swim right up to the person. You know why? Because a drowning person will try to stand on top of their rescue swimmer. It's not very logical, but the limbic system, when it's engaged, isn't very logical. But that's what human beings do. They try to stand on top of their rescue swimmer as if they're a concrete object. You've heard stories where two friends go out on a lake fishing and one falls in, the other one jumps in to save them, and they both drown. This is because the first drowning person tries to stand on top of their rescue swimmer. And these people that are in the Coast Guard, they know the physiology of this. They know this person could be tiny in stature by comparison, but full of limbic system is in full gear. They can be powerful, powerful, powerful beings. So they make this very quick assessment. Will that life preserver keep you up for a little bit longer? And if so, I'm staying back. If not, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take control of the situation. But that's the first thing they look for. And then what they do is they tell the person kind of what they're going to do. They shout it, but they don't make it, or they, what, no, let me back up. They say things like this. They say, hi, my name's David. Boy, I hope my tomatoes are okay. And the person in the water who's having trouble hearing or processing sound is going, did I just hear that right? Are you talking about your tomatoes? They say, oh, the Blazers. You see the Blazers. Oh, man, the Blazers. I can't believe that overtime. You know, they're like, he's talking basketball? What, you know, what's going on here? They're trained to do it because what they want to convey to the person who's in the water as quickly as possible is this message: I'm not overwhelmed and I have hope about the future. That's what they want to convey. Ain't that the person you want to come rescue you? Person out in that terrible storm who's thinking about his tomato garden? And the fact that he's thinking about a tomato garden means he wants to get back to his tomato garden. That means he thinks there's a future. That's who I want coming to rescue me. I don't want the rescue swimmer to swim over and go, oh my God, this is terrible! We're screwed! I've never seen conditions like this before! And take someone who's in the stratosphere of fear and send them into deep space. But that's what we do often with people. That's the message we're conveying. They're really stressed out. We're going, oh my God, where's the crisis plan? Get the crisis plan. Call the office. Somebody call the office. Now the person who's upset is like on the moon. Or what we'll do is we'll take a person who's just started working in this profession and have them try to help a person who's like all over the map like this in crisis with some regularity, and then we don't get why it doesn't work. They don't need the untrained rescue swimmer. They need the person whose rescue swimmer's got so much confidence. They believe there's a future. They have hope about the future. They know what to do. It's just amazing to me. And we take people with the most complex support needs. We often surround them by the people who are the least experienced, who can learn these things with time. But you don't send a whole bunch of new recruits out on the helicopter to help the guy in the storm. You train the new recruits and you have them go out with people that know what they're doing, have been in these operations before and have learned from trial and error what to do. That's what you need, people with self-confidence. Then the rescue swimmer will say to the person, listen, I'm going to come around, I'm going to grab you by the shoulders, I'm going to put this strap underneath you. They don't give the person a lot of choices. They don't come over and go, well, there's a variety of different ways I could save you. There's a French method that involves a harness underneath the legs. Recently in the Journal of Rescue Swimming, a fascinating piece from the Czechs on harnesses that come under their arms, but anything you'd like me to try, I can. Oh my God, why? Because they know the person's not in their prefrontal cortex. They can't make choices and decisions about things. They tell the person, this is what I'm going to do. When people are in crisis, when people are really aroused this way, you know, it's not a time to be like wanting to do person-centered planning with them. They're physiologically not available to hearing sound, let alone processing language. What they need is some clarity about what to do. And the best time to figure out what to do is after things have calmed down. Talk to them about things that worked and didn't work. It's really wonderful to include a person then when they're in their prefrontal cortex, but not during the crisis itself. People can't think clearly. But that's a mistake we make. Now, what about your breathing exercises, you know? Why aren't you doing... Well, it's questionable the person can hear, let alone process language at a time like that. Finally, a thing that is really common for people is that they form huge attachment with their rescue swimmers. Huge attachment, which turns out to be something that's really good for us. You know, it's thought that when we're in crisis, the pituitary gland releases that protein I told you about before, oxytocin, the affiliation hormone. The adaptive significance of this is when we're in crisis, we are programmed to go ask for help, to seek it out from the other members of the pack. We're more likely to survive a danger if we try to do it collectively than if we try to do it as individuals. And the brain actually reinforces it biomechanically, biochemically. And one of the things that often happens when someone's in a jam and you help them through the jam is that the likelihood of relationship goes up dramatically. You might say a crisis is an opportunity to form a meaningful relationship with someone, help them get through the tough time. The likelihood of being in a meaningful relationship with them grows. The likelihood then that they'll be able to listen to and hear what you have to say for advice grows. That's what Kenneth Minkoff knows with those people who have been so resistant, is you help them with things that are immediate to them, help them out of a jam when they need help out of a jam, and the likelihood goes up, dramatically goes up, that they're going to be able to hear a lot of things you got to say. Often people in our system, they form a huge attachment with one of their caregivers to the exclusion of other caregivers, and we act like this is psychopathology, like there's something wrong with the person. But yeah, but it makes total sense for me. Somebody helps you out of a jam, especially if you're a really anxious person, and when they're around, you don't feel anxious. I'd want to know where they are and want them to be there all the time, too. I mean, can you imagine the person who's getting rescued at sea when the rescue swimmer comes over going, well, you can help me with the first part of the rescue operation, but I want to make sure all my caregivers have an equal chance to help me. So, you know, you just grab onto the first person who comes. It's not pathological. Often people will come back to the rescue station afterwards for months, bringing brownies and things. Oh, my God, don't you remember when we were going up in the basket, the clouds opened up and light came down on both of us? I think God was trying to bless our relationship. And you know the Coast Guard has a specific debriefing process for this? They're not surprised it happens. They're surprised when it doesn't happen. But being that person for someone doesn't mean you do anything wrong, but it's a lot of responsibility to be that person for someone. And for a while, you got to take care of yourself if you're the one person in the world that can help them feel relaxed even for just a part of one day of the week. And your chore isn't to say, oh, well, I can't be around you, you're getting too dependent on me, which is a response from our system so often. Your responsibility is to say, I got to help you meet other people who can help you feel this way too. All of that idea is shared in the paper on my website called Jumping into the Chaos of Things. Oh, I see you have it on your paper, on your folder. You're welcome to read more about it in there, but it concludes with this idea, or is about this idea, that helping people that are distressed is stressful. You know, helping people out of a jam. There's a process that's called vicarious traumatization, which means you help people over and over again who might be sick or dying, or you help people that have gone through trauma in their lives, and there's a really good chance you're going to start to develop the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's called vicarious traumatization. The symptoms of it are things like can't keep a thought straight in my head, I can't sleep very well at night anymore, I start something but can't follow it through, feel depressed. Sometimes I feel emotionally really sad and I don't know why. Other times things that should affect me emotionally don't affect me in the least. Sound familiar? substance abuse issues. The rates of substance abuse among people doing our work is higher than almost any other profession. It's a process called vicarious traumatization. You've got to learn to take care of yourself. There's a wonderful resource about this from a woman named Laura Vandernoot called Trauma Stewardship. And the whole idea of that book is that people who do the work you do are people who need to understand that it is an honor to be invited into people's lives who hurt in the way people hurt. It is truly an honor. We are stewards, but it has impact on us. And we have to learn to take care of ourselves if we want to do that work with integrity over time. The two archetypes of people who have survived trauma, who have have vicarious traumatization. One archetype is the knight on the white horse, there to save people. It is my work. And the other is the person who's become cynical and depressed, who doesn't believe in anything anymore. This all sucks, this is bullshit. That's the other archetype. And in one form or another, each of those archetypes shows up in all of us from time to time. The question is, are we balanced? A person's needs are best met by people whose needs are met.